I am the original coal miner's son. I was born in Chandler, Colorado, which was a mining camp for the Victor American Fuel Company. My folks came in the winter of 1927, right after the Cold Wars, because the camp was closed until then, and then they opened it up. That mine was first started in 1881. And during the Cold Wars, it was a closed camp. It was a small camp. It was probably, when I was going to school there was probably about between 400 and 500 residents. And I was born in that camp, which to me is an experience that I wish my kids could have had, living in a small camp. My folks were very strict. We dug a root cellar and I used to shovel to the left. He says, shovel to the right. And I said, it's either to the left, shovel to the right. And he had me doing all kinds of work. He was very strict. And at that time when I was growing up, I thought my dad wasn't very smart. But when I grew up, I found out how wise he was. Because he finally told me, he says, the only inheritance that I have to leave you is to show you how to work. Okay? Well, they closed the mine in June of 1942, right after the school ended, and we moved here to Pueblo in the Salt Creek area. At age 16, I went in the mill, and I became 16 years old on the 17th of February, 1944, and I started working in the mill on the 22nd of February, 1944. I had only worked around farm machinery, but I used to hear the guys talk about the 14-inch, the 20-inch, and all this machinery in the mill, and I was wondering if I was going to be able to work around these machines. I never worked around that kind of machinery. Not to worry. The day I went into the yard department, and the first thing the boss says, coal pile. We used to stockpile 25 cars of coal a day. They'd open the doors and we had to shovel it out so that the bulldozer could move it out of the way. And so I was right at home. And it was a good thing that my dad showed me how to shovel. So when I went to the open hearth, I started in the labor gang, and then eventually I went to the ingot stripper. And right next to the ingot stripper was the ingot yard, where they used to store ingots that they didn't need right away. So I worked there until I lost my arm in 1976. I was at a union convention in Wyoming, and I got sideswiped. I had my arm out the window, and in the curve I got sideswiped and took my arm off. I got back in the mill, right away. I was sweeping in the open hearth. The open hearth was shutting down. Then I got laid off, and I was getting close to running out of unemployment, and the union was telling me, "We'll get you a job. We'll get you. Don't worry." Well, I was getting close to running out of unemployment, and I had a meeting with the president of CF&I, Clay Crawford, and we went to talk to him, and he says, "Well, we don't have a job." So I told him, according to our union contract, after 19 years of seniority, I have a right to apply for a disability pension. Crawford says, we're not giving nobody disability pensions. I says, and what do I do with my family? He says, put them on welfare. So I went down to the wealth department, and they told me, you better get out of here, because we're trying to get people off, not put people on. So when I told my wife that I was going to apply for welfare, she says, no, you're not. She told me, I'll work in a bar before I go on welfare. Well, eventually, I did get back in the mill, and I finished working in at the end of 1985, and officially retired in March of 1986. I had a lot of experiences, some good, some bad. So one day, I was outside in between mixes, and they had this number 27 truck, which was a bobtail with a long bed, and they had a couple rolls in there that they were going to take into the roll shop because they put them on the lathe and dress them down and then put them back in service. And this young guy couldn't get that truck in there. And I was out there watching, and I was laughing. Well, the general foreman of the trucking department saw me and says, "What the hell are you laughing at?" I said, "That dummy can't back that truck in there." He says, "You think you can?" I said, "You bet I can. Get in there." So I backed it up and put it in the shop. And then he told me, "Give me your name and brass check. When I need an extra driver, I'll call you." So I got to drive trucks, which paid a little more, because the starting wage when I went in there was 75.5 cents an hour, which is $6.04, which at that time was a fairly good wage. And after 6 months, if you proved out, you'd get $6.40. You'd get a 36-cent raise. So going on this truck job, you'd make a little more, so that helped me out. When I went to work at the stripper, I worked with some Slovenians, Italians, and my dad had always taught me to be real respectful. So there was one Slovenian who was very heavy, and he couldn't bend down to tie his shoes, so I offered to tie one time. Well, after that, it became my job, which I did because, you know, I had to respect my elders. And after I lost my arm, I went to the wire mill, and I started sweeping the floors, and then I got on the scales, and eventually I drove a forklift. All my memories of CF&I were good, and they improved when the guys started coming back from the service, and the union, which was finally authorized after several attempts, it was a representative for the workers, and so everything started improving. I became active in the union, became an assistant grievance man, and eventually became recording secretary. The only bad thing that happened to me there was when I first started in the yard department. I used to work with this old Mexican man, and CF&I, all their fences were wooden on the southeast end, and we used to repair them. And this man offered me a cigarette one time, and well, I was started, and he said, "Inhale," and he's the guy that started me smoking. So I finally had to ask my dad for permission because I wouldn't smoke at home. And I told him, I said, "You know, I'm starting to smoke." He says, "Well, it's not good for you. You're old enough to know better." So I smoked, and I smoked for 30 years and then quit. Thank God. I met a lot of guys when I became active in the union, and then I started, after I lost my arm, I started editing the local union paper, which I got an education. I got elected to a conference, and from there I was put on a committee by the International Union, and we founded the Steelworkers Press Association, patterned after the International Labor Press Association, which I traveled all over the country. And we were having our meetings. I have read throughout the history of the steel industry and the steel workers. I went through reading everything that happened during the Cold Wars, what happened with Ludlow after several some attempts and court fight. Finally, the steel workers came in, and everything started improving. You may hear some things, bad things, about unions, but it isn't the union. Some workers just didn't didn't like the rules that the union and the company had agreed to. And the one thing about the old CF&I is that this company actually built this town. Then when Oregon Steel bought the plant, Matt Pulin and I, who were active in our Steelworkers Organization of Active Retirees, were called, CF&I called us out of a conference in Springs, and we came home and flew to Phoenix where they were in the last negotiations. And as a result, the bankruptcy court awarded the union $67.5 million of the sale price for a health plan for workers who were retired or who had 30 years of service by 1993. I'm the only original trustee still serving on our health plan. I'm kind of proud that I'm still there. I've seen a lot of the guys I worked with have passed away. We really like the museum. I'm proud that I served here, and I'm proud we have the museum, because I still have a lot of artifacts from CF&I that eventually I'll turn in. I already turned a lot of stuff in. But my memories are, CF&I are good. He was a good employer. I had some problems with some foremen, but they were ironed out though. The long strike was a 49 strike. It was 116 days. And eventually it was solved. We had picket lines. CF&I would lend us the barrels and the coke to keep warm. And we'd have a tent on company property. So there's pretty good relations. Of course, there was differences sometimes. The 49 strike, we kept the picket lines going around the clock. And I used to go work on the farms. As I worked on the farms, even when I worked in the mill, I used to go work on the farms when I worked 311 and days. Work with these farmers that I had worked for, go out there and work. So during the strike, I never asked for help, because I used to go and work and make a few bucks. And of course, I'd get all the vegetables I wanted. So, and then come and serve my time over here. And, certainly, I'm very grateful for having worked at CF&I, because I raised a family, and today I have a pension.